So hi, John. So for my students out there, John is a local attorney and he specializes in entrepreneurs. So he is the entrepreneur's lawyer. And so I thought it would be great to have John answer these questions about some of the legal issues that you run into as you are forming a business and as you are growing and scaling your business. So, welcome, John. How are you doing?
I'm well. Thank you so much for the invite.
You're welcome. So I'm going to just dive in. Oh, actually, why don't you tell me a little bit about you before we get started?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me turn my ringer off. You know that about me. My phone rings sometimes. Well, as Helen said, my name is John Wheatman. I'm a lawyer up here in Carroll County, but I cover Howard and Frederick and Baltimore and Anne Arundel from time to time. And I do specialize in startups and small businesses and all that kind of stuff. I had 20 years in the business world before I ever set foot in a law school. So that makes me a little different than most.
So you've lived it, which is I think is very important.
Yeah, I would agree. My clients tend to appreciate the fact that yes, we apply the law and we go through all the legal issues, but it can be done a little differently when you realize what it's like to sit in the other chair and the practical ramifications of the legal topics that need to be worked through.
Yes. Yes, very good. Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you for so much for being part of this. I know my students value it.
Hmm.
So I have some questions,
Okay.
and I'm gonna, so one of the first ones that I hear a lot is when people are just starting out, what kind of business structure should they choose? Like what kind of entity formation? And I do know some of my students are doing nonprofits, so
Mhm.
sort of cover a little bit of different varieties.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of legal issues, I'm going to begin with a short disclaimer. And that is when I do these kind of things, I need to point out to anybody who's watching this and may ever see this, that what I'm about to speak about is general legal information. It is not specific legal advice. Nobody who's seeing this, do I have an attorney-client relationship with? There's no attorney-client privilege. Should you need specific legal advice, contact me or the attorney of your choice.
Thank you.
So we got that done. So now back to the more fun part, the actual question you asked. Yeah, absolutely. There are options, there are alternatives in forming your business entity, and which one to choose depends really upon what the ultimate goal of the company is. And also keep in mind that just because you choose one today doesn't necessarily mean you're stuck with that forever. So I'll talk briefly about the three basic types, the three most common types. An LLC, limited liability company. Very easy to start, very inexpensive to start, certainly ideal if you're just a solo and you're a sole member LLC. Very quick and easy to get it up and running, but it does still give you that liability protection you want as a small business owner, while also giving you some fairly favorable tax treatment. But on the other hand, let's talk about corporations. Corporations are more expensive to start. They're more complicated. There are more rules that come with it. But if you're looking to sell stock, if you're looking to raise money through that, through equity stake, then a corporation is often the best way to go. You get the same sort of liability protection, but now the structure is being driven by the ownership method, equity offering stockholders. And so now you're looking at that. Partnerships are kind of a middle ground. We don't use those as much as we used to. Nonprofits are actually corporations. So you form a corporation just like any other corporation that you would form. And then you go to the IRS and you fill out this giant form that says, hey, IRS, pretty please allow me to be taxed as a nonprofit. So you are a corporation, but you have nonprofit tax status through the IRS through virtue of filing this application and meeting all the benchmarks and requirements to be a nonprofit.
Excellent. Excellent. That actually, I wasn't aware of that, so that's good. That's thank you.
Sure.
Um, so, one of the first things they do is they are choosing a business name, and so, what do they need to know about choosing a business name?
Yeah. Yeah, you have wide-ranging latitude in choosing your business name with the singular and very important exception is don't choose a name somebody else is already using. It happens all the time, and it's a very unpleasant experience to find out or get that cease and desist letter from another company saying, hey, we've been using that name for 22 years, change yours. And at that point, you may be invested in it. you may have already formed your company and you got to undo all that, change your name. And so certainly we want to avoid that. There are some searches that can be done. Well, I think we'll get into intellectual property here in a little bit and kind of put a pin in that for now. But at a minimum, you want to search your trade areas, doing Google searches and Yelp searches and all of that kind of stuff, and state databases to see who has businesses registered, perhaps in that name or a name very close to that name. And it's also kind of important not to try to get too cute with any of the big companies. You don't want to start a big pizza place called Pizza Hut, because Pizza Hut's going to come for you, and you're probably going to. But the legal side of it is, again, a little different than the marketing side. And I'll leave the marketing side to you. There's a lot that goes into picking your business name from the marketing side, but you just don't want to infringe on somebody else's intellectual property and find yourself having to unravel what you've done and start over in terms of naming your business.
Very good. So as we touched on intellectual property, how can they protect their intellectual property?
Sure. It breaks down into kind of three parts depending on what exactly the intellectual property is. So let's start with trade names. Trade names is everything from McDonald's to Domino's to Apple Computer to Have It Your Way. And it's a name that you use that may or may not be the actual name of your business. But that's a trade name. And you go to the U.S. Patent Office and Trademark Office, U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and you file for a trademark. It's a fairly rigorous application process. It can take up to a year to actually get your trademark. And most of you out there, you've probably seen next to a business name, they might have a circle and an R. And that means that trademark is registered with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. It's very important protection. It's very rigorous protection. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office does that whole name search that I was talking about a few moments ago. And if they give you that registered trademark, that means the examiner is satisfied that you're not stepping on somebody else's name. So those are trade names. Now let's talk about copyrights. Copyrights, in essence, are works of art, but legally, works of art includes things like even computer programs. But certainly it's music and it's stories and it's paintings. I did recently some copyright work for somebody who's written a really pretty amazing comic book, 168-page comic book. That's a work of art, and those get copywritten. Even your websites should be copywritten. And there's two parts to that too. Copyright, you do not have to register the copyright. It's a good idea. It's more protection, and you go through the Copyright Office, U.S. Copyright Office. But you can just put on your work of art, or even at the bottom of your website, copyright 2023, and then who holds it, name of the company, your name. And that just tells the world that this thing I created, this work of creativity, this work of art, I own it. It's my copyright. But again, there's a little more detail we don't have time to get into.
So questions about that. So if somebody is having part of their business is having an app created, they should get that copyrighted.
Yeah, I would suggest that they do, because the app presumably is going to be made up of both what's under the hood in terms of the coding that's done, but certainly you're going to have the graphics and appearance and the colors of the app, the user interface of your app, and that should all be copywritten as well. And again, you can just claim the copyright, just claim it, that's good, but registering it is better.
Okay. What about patents? Because some of the students are going to have some products created.
Yeah, patent is a very, very specialized area of law. In fact, most patent attorneys are also engineers or computer programmers or some such things. It's a very, very, very technical process, also filed through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. But what you're looking for there is something that's truly novel. It can be a combination of things that exist, put together in a way that they've never been put together before, or as it really is one of these lightning strikes and look what I invented type things. And it's similar to a trademark, and that a very extensive search needs to be done to see if that patent is already out there, or if the new patent infringes at least in part on another patent out there. And if not, then you file the patent application with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and then again, you have very, very powerful protection for what it is you created. And these tend to be mechanical, but not solely mechanical. Hybrid plants.
That specifically, I mean, well, to trademark, I would recommend getting a lawyer to help with, but definitely patent sounds pretty intense. and not something someone should probably undertake all on their own.
Correct, and you're not even, it's very difficult to do it without.
Okay.
It just is. I wish it weren't that way, but it is. In terms of order, copyright registration is fairly easy. It's not easy, but it's fairly easy. Trademark is kind of in the middle. You probably want an attorney to do that. Patent, I'm going to tell you, with rare exception, you almost certainly want a lawyer to do that for
Very good. Thank you.
you. Mhm.
Okay. Now, how do they minimize their risk when it comes as an employer? So as they start getting employees, how do they,
Mhm.
what are
Yeah.
some of the employee issues they have to think about from a legal perspective?
Sure. And that's an excellent question. And the short answer is we'll do everything right. But that's not a very helpful answer. It's just short. So when a company is hiring their first employee, I do recommend that you either go to someone who's very, very knowledgeable in HR and or an attorney to get that done. Because now what you've done is you've created an entirely new level of processes for your company. One layer just includes things like registering with the comptroller's office in the state of Maryland, registering with the IRS, so that you can begin to withhold the taxes that you need to withhold. Now we've got a whole hiring process. It's also governed by the state and the feds. Have you collected their appropriate paperwork? Have you done the I-9 that proves they're eligible to work in the United States? All of those kind of things, and that's just to get the person on board. There's also a lot of regulations involved in the sort of questions you may ask and may not ask, both at the application stage and then again at the interviewing stage, and then even after hiring. And you need to do all of those things correctly. Once you have your first employee, you really need to start considering having an employee handbook. And again, that's a 45-minute topic in and of itself. But you can't really hold an employee accountable to your process and your procedures and your company rules unless you have presented them in writing with those things. And now we're also looking at an employee handbook.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
we just went over ethics earlier this week.
mhm,
So we went into detail about if you have an ethical code, how important it is to make sure you communicate that
mhm.
and the employees understand that because you can't watch everything they do and they are representing the business and you have to make sure that they are not doing stuff that's not only unethical but also illegal.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely right. And without that sort of thing in writing, even like what's the dress code? You show up on time. What if you have a concern over a hostile workplace? Who do you talk to? It's all of this stuff is in there. Not having that stuff to me is akin to inviting 10 people to a field and putting a ball down in the middle and saying, now let's play. Well, what can't we? None of us know the rules.
Yeah. Yeah.
How are we going to play it right? And it really kind of works like that. It's important stuff. I'll give you one quick example on the hiring process is that, and this is relatively new in the state of Maryland. A lot of employers still don't know this, and that is, as you're accepting applications, you may no longer ask an applicant whether they have a felony if they've ever been arrested. That used to be a very standard question on applications. It is now against the law to do so. You may, once you offer them the job, say, yeah, you're my candidate, you're my person. By the way, before you start, have you ever committed a felony? Have you ever been arrested? You can ask at that point, but you can't screen your applicants by asking that question that used to be a very standard question. So that's just a quick example of some of the things we need to know as employers that can run you afoul of the law just in the hiring process.
Mm, very good. Um, what about operating agreements or bylaws? Those are some of the early things that I know even banks ask about.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're not going to be able anymore really to open a bank account or certainly get a loan, purchase any real estate without in the name of the company without showing an operating agreement or bylaws. Operating agreements pertain to LLCs. LLCs don't have bylaws; they have operating agreements. And if you're a solo, if it's just you and your LLC, an operating agreement can be as short as a couple of 3 pages, really brief with it. But an operating agreement is the rules of the LLC. This is our name. Here's where we're situated. This is who our resident agent is. This is the type of business we say that we're able to conduct. Um, and it just goes through that. So again, if it's a solo member, it can be pretty short. As soon as you add a second member, and from there on, in an LLC, an operating agreement also serves as a de facto partnership agreement. So now that nice little 3-pager turns into a 12-pager, because now we need to talk about how did the members come in? What do they do while the LLC is operating? Whose responsibilities are what? How are profits shared? What is a profit? Is it net? Is it gross? Is it after reinvestment? Is it pre-tax? Is it post-tax? And then something that gets forgotten sometimes is, well, how do we get out of it?
Yeah.
What if partner A gets hit by a bus? What if partner B hits a lottery and moves to Aruba? How do we dissolve this thing, or how do we remove a member? If a member's hit by a bus, does that membership interest go to the partner? Does it go to that member's family? All of these things are okay, but this is what the operating agreement needs to spell out. The reason banks, et cetera, want them is somewhere in an operating agreement is going to say, hey, these are the people that have the power to open a bank account.
Yeah.
These are the people who can sign on behalf of the corporation, or the LLC, I should say. So it becomes an important document, but also important to note, it's purely an internal document. It doesn't get filed with anybody, but again, certain entities may ask for it just to see, you, Helen, own an LLC, you want to open a bank account? Show me you own the LLC and show me you're authorized to open this bank account. That's what it does. Bylaws are more formal, longer, more complex, but they serve the same purpose for a corporation. In the case of bylaws, it's going to go into what kind of stock is being offered, who can own the stock, what's the par value. So there's more to it, but it serves the same purpose. It's what are the rules of the corporation? How does it run?
Very good. As as these students they're coming up, they came up with their ideas, and a lot of them are very innovative, but they're only one person, so they need
Mhm.
to hire, whether it's contractors or suppliers, and they want to protect this idea, and
Mhm.
as they're developing it. So,
Mhm.
can you tell us more about confidentiality agreements and non-disclosure agreements?
Yeah, they're really one and the same, just a couple different ways to name them. They can be very powerful, but practically speaking, um, everybody who runs a business needs to understand, once somebody knows something, they can't unknow it.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't mean you don't want the legal protection of a non-disclosure um, or confidentiality agreement. And what they're used for is to sort of lock somebody down, saying, okay, you work here, and as part of your employment, you are necessarily going to be giving access to company financial records, customer list, client list, pricing structure, or formulary items. How is this made? What chemicals go into it? What torque do we put on these bolts? How does this thing operate? What is the code behind this app? And what a non-disclosure confidentiality agreement says, hey, you promised not to disclose this to anybody, not now, not forever, even when you don't work here anymore. And they're enforceable. And if you can prove your case, there are damages and there's judgments to be had. But my practical advice is make sure that anybody you're giving this information to the extent you can, that you do trust them. And if you have something that is really, 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 if you develop EPA safe cold fusion in your basement, one, let me know, I'm interested. But two, that's the kind of thing that maybe when you hire people, this one knows this part of it, and this one knows this part of it, and that one knows that part of it. Because again, when somebody knows something, they know.
I have a story related to that. One time I worked for a corporation, and the VP of marketing called me in, and because I was the research person, I was the launcher, the research person, and he says, "Oh, I want all your research on this industry," and it was Pacific area we were going after, and pulled together the research I had, brought it to him, and it pretty much less than a week, um, he had given his notice that he was leaving, and he was working, had been hired by one of those people in the industry. So it
Mhm.
was pretty obvious that he asked me that at that particular time because he knew he was hired and that he wanted all the information that we had on
Mhm.
this industry and all the different information we had. Um, I know that the owner of the business did go after him based on the information that I provided. Um, so what happened, I don't remember. Is
Mhm.
that long ago? I don't know. I mean, because once you get into a legal battle, it's a little, it's messy. So I don't know what happened, but it was based on that, non-disclosure, and he was taking the information and he was going to run
Mhm.
with it that I was providing.
Yeah, and they're tough cases to pursue because you have to show that one, this person knew that information. Two, that the information was in fact confidential. It wasn't something that's out in the market. Three, you have to show that they did transfer the information to somebody else. That four, that information was used to the detriment of the original holder. Five, what are the damages? And you're just getting started in pursuing that case.
Yeah. Yeah. So you can try to protect your knowledge, but I think your point was try to work with people that you trust
Mhm.
and maybe don't give them all the information.
Yeah, you don't have
Yeah.
to make the
Yeah.
company fight. And again, let me be clear. I'm not at all saying these agreements are not worth your time. That's the opposite of what I'm saying. If you hold that kind of information, absolutely you should have these agreements in place. Just the practical idea is belts and suspenders.
Mhm.
Use that belt of an agreement to hold his pants up, but then put the suspenders on top, and maybe if you have the option, not lay everything out to everybody.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly causes people to say, "Oh, I signed this. I really am not supposed to share this
Mhm.
information." And I'm sure just that in itself, they know that they're in the wrong if they do share it or if they do take information, go after the customer list and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you don't want to leave yourself in a position where a former employee could legitimately say, "Hey, I didn't know. Nobody told me this was
Correct.
confidential. I didn't know I couldn't share it." You
Correct.
don't want to live there.
Yeah. Very good. Well, what about contracts? They're probably going to have contracts. What can you tell
Mhm,
us about
mhm.
contracts?
Yeah, you know,
Big
contracts are
topic,
an
I
area.
know.
It is. I know, and I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I do like to practice proactive law where I can. You've heard me say that before. So it's really important to have somebody review those contracts, whether it's one that's presented to you for signing or one that you want to draft and present to somebody else for signing, because far too often somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I signed this, but now this is happening. Where do I stand?" I would much rather see that contract before it's signed so that we can walk through it and say, okay, this doesn't look good for you. This doesn't look good for you. Or more often, it's like, well, what if this happens? It isn't even in the contract. So this contract's incomplete. Many times, particularly in the building trade, somebody will hand me this and say, hey, this is a contract I signed. I'm like, this isn't a contract. This is a scope of work. It doesn't even get close to being a complete contract. And so then is it enforceable? Is it not enforceable? So the main point that I can relay is that, once you sign it, um, don't later say, I didn't know what was in it. That's really, really a bad idea. You don't have that luxury. And if you're offering contracts in your business, whether it's the vendors or customers or whoever the case may be, really get some expert help in having that drafted. And another important tip too, once you have your business formed, whether it's a corporation or an LLC, the entity doesn't matter. When you sign something on behalf of that company, you must sign your name and then followed with on behalf of ABC LLC, or sign your name and write member ABC LLC, or vice president ABC LLC. Put your title on there. Otherwise, you're signing that document personally and not on behalf of your business. And then if you have problem, you're at personal risk and you're losing that first layer liability protection you want.
Ah, very good. So the whole reason to have an LLC is to protect your personal assets. And if you don't sign that, put your name in as the president, owner, what something manager,
Mhm.
then you are putting yourself at risk and you're losing that protection.
You are a super short example. I had somebody not long ago that had signed a lease on a very small commercial property. But as it turns out, the business didn't work out. Some of it was the issues with the landlord. Some of his business didn't work out. And so this person was going to kind of wind down their business. And guess what? Landlord says, you signed this personally. So you still owe 9 months on this lease and you can wind down your LLC, but we're coming after you because you signed this, and had that person simply sign their name on behalf of, or member of, or vice president, or grand poobah, whatever,
Yeah.
of ABC LLC, completely different story.
Mm. Gold. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gold. You just saved somebody there.
I hope so. I hope so. I hate to see that happen.
Yeah. Okay, what else do I have here? Let's see. We covered a lot. Um, why don't I'm gonna just let you, what are some of the common questions that you've heard from entrepreneurs? Why don't you just share some
Mhm.
of the things you've heard?
Sure. Okay. And this is actually because you hit so many of the topics I have listed here, so I don't have a whole lot left for the amount of time we have here. Um, I do get clients often that are looking to buy or sell a business. When we talk entrepreneurship, I think we tend to think of building it, and that's excellent. I think that's what happened more often or not. But I do know sometimes somebody says, you know what, um, I want to buy that business, or I want to buy into that business, or even, hey, I've been at this for 3 years already. I've got 4 new businesses I want to start. I want to sell this one. So buy-sell agreements are really important in nailing down what exactly is it that's being sold? What exactly is it that's being purchased? Is it the whole business? Is it the name? Are you buying the membership interest, or are you just buying the assets? And you don't want the company. So that's an area that's a little more trickier than sometimes people think. Um, I also know that we're talking to on average is a younger audience, but when you're starting a business, it is not too early to start thinking about retirement planning and estate planning. And I mentioned before about multi-member LLCs and what happens to your membership interest if you get hit by a bus. And it's really important to kind of be thinking through those things too. If you're a solo member LLC, for example, Helen, and you get hit by a bus, then that LLC immediately shuts down because you were the LLC. And it takes a long time to unravel that and get the bank accounts emptied and the vendors paid because now I got a personal representative. Again, I don't want to get into too much estate and trust stuff. But it's kind of important to consider those things, whether you're 18 years old or 80 years old.
Mhm. Very good. Okay, what else? Is there anything like you had mentioned collections?
Yeah. Yeah, usually if you have customers and you want them, and if they're paying you for your product or services, and you want that too, at some point, unless you're always getting cash in advance, somebody decides I'm not going to pay you. And sometimes it's a won't pay, and sometimes it's a can't pay. If it's a can't pay, there's only so much you're going to do about that. Their LSE went out of business and they didn't pay you, and that's probably. But let's say it's a won't pay. Again, we don't have time to get into all the details, but there are some specific hoops that you have to jump through, and the ways you have to present it, and the way things have to be worded. But often companies will use an attorney to at least go after those things that are larger and haven't been paid over a certain amount of time to try to get you paid for your goods and your services. There's certainly collection agencies out there that they can do the same thing for a percentage of what's owed. But non-payment can wreak havoc, obviously, with your cash flow, your ability to pay your vendors. Nobody wants to say, "Hey, vendor, I would have paid you, but I didn't get paid." That's not a good place to be.
Very good. Well, we covered a lot, and I appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you very much. Is there
Sure.
anything else you wanted to add, or are I think we have gave them a lot to think about.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot. I think that's plenty for now. Again, in order to keep this in a digestible length, there's only so much we can cover, and really what we covered are the most common areas of concern that my clients present to me.
If they have more questions, which they likely will as they
Mhm.
get going, how can they get a hold of you?
Sure, a couple different ways to do it. If you don't remember anything else, if you search the Entrepreneur's Lawyer, Westminster, Maryland, you'll certainly find me. My full name is Jonathan Wheatman. I go by John. You can get me at John, Jon, at J Wheatman Law, which is JWEETMANLAW.com. Or I still like the telephone, pick it up and call me directly at 410-236-0056.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I appreciate your expertise and sharing your time, and I know the students appreciate it too. So,
Great. Hope it's helpful.
okay, it definitely is. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
All right. You're
Bye.
welcome. Take care.